You are not forgetting because you are careless. You are not forgetting because you are aging too quickly. And you are not forgetting because you lack discipline or intelligence. Yet this is where your mind goes first. You misplace a name that mattered. You forget why you walked into a room. You abandon intentions that once felt clear and sincere. And quietly, without saying it aloud, a fear forms. Something in me is slipping. Most people respond to this fear by tightening themselves. They push harder. They add reminders, systems, and urgency. They blame distraction, technology, and weakness of will. But beneath all of this effort, the forgetting continues. What you are experiencing is not a failure of memory. It is a sign of inner turbulence. In the old language of cultivation, the mind is not treated as a container meant to be filled and organized. It is treated as a field, a surface, a body of water. When it is still, it reflects clearly. When it is disturbed, even what is directly in front of it cannot be seen. Important things are not lost because they are unimportant. They are lost because the inner ground meant to hold them is constantly moving. You are carrying too many unresolved emotions inside you. Unfinished conversations, deferred decisions, roles you perform without inhabiting, responsibilities taken on without rhythm. None of this feels dramatic. That is what makes it dangerous. This forgetting happens quietly in capable people, often those who appear functional on the outside, people who work, care, manage, and endure, people who have learned to survive without stopping, especially people over 30, because by this stage of life, forgetting no longer feels like an inconvenience. It feels like erosion. You begin to sense that what you forget is not just information, but parts of yourself, values you once lived by, promises you made inwardly, the reason you chose a path in the first place, and still you hesitate to name it. Instead, you say, I'm busy, or my mind is scattered, or I just need to focus more. But deep down, you know this explanation does not touch the real issue. In Daoist understanding, when the river is turbulent, it is not corrected by commanding the water to be clear. The command itself adds disturbance. The clarity returns only when the causes of agitation are removed. This is uncomfortable to hear because it means effort is not the answer. An effort is what you know. You have tried to correct forgetting through force before. You have promised yourself to be more organized, more disciplined, more present. And when it did not last, you quietly concluded that the failure was personal. This is the shame you have been carrying unnecessarily. The problem is not that you are incapable of remembering. The problem is that your inner life has lost its still center. And without a center, nothing stays. When everything inside is moving at once, even the most important things slide past without landing. Not because they lack weight, but because there is no place for them to settle. This is the diagnosis most people never receive. They are told to optimize, to train memory, to reduce distraction. But no one tells them that remembrance is a consequence of alignment. When alignment is lost, forgetting is inevitable. When alignment is restored, remembering requires no effort at all. Before we speak of how this turbulence forms or how it can be refined, one thing must be made clear. You are not broken. You are not late. And you are not failing at adulthood. You are simply living with too much motion inside and too little stillness to contain what matters. This is not a call to fix yourself. It is an invitation to see clearly. And clarity, in the old way, always begins with still observation. There is an old teaching passed quietly between master and disciple, not written to be impressive, only to be remembered when the time is right. A young disciple once approached his teacher at dawn. His brow was tight, his movements restless. He bowed, then spoke. Master, I forgot what matters. I study, I listen, I try to be attentive, yet when the moment comes, my mind is empty. Tell me how to strengthen my memory. The master did not answer. Instead, He led the disciple to a stone table beside the mountain path. On it sat a simple bowl filled with water, clear and still. The master gestured for the disciple to look. "Tell me what you see." The disciple leaned in. "I see my face," he said, "and the sky above it." Without warning, the master tapped the side of the bowl. The water shuddered. Ripples spread outward, colliding, overlapping. The reflection shattered into fragments of light. "Now," the master said, "what do you see?" The disciple frowned. "Nothing clearly, only movement." The master nodded. The water did not lose the sky. The sky did not leave the bowl, yet it can no longer be reflected. The disciple waited, sensing there was more, but the master remained silent. After a long moment, the disciple asked, "How do I make the water still again?" The master stepped back and folded his hands behind his back. "You do not," he said. "You stop disturbing it." This teaching was never meant to explain memory. It was meant to explain the mind. In the classical understanding, the mind is not something that grasps and stores. It is something that receives and reflects. What it reflects depends entirely on its condition. When the surface is calm, even distant mountains appear with precision. When the surface is disturbed, even what stands directly above it vanishes. The disciple believed his problem was weakness. He believed he needed more strength, more effort, more control. But the master revealed a different truth. The disturbance itself was the cause of forgetting. This is difficult for adults to accept because disturbance often feels like productivity. Movement feels like engagement. Restlessness feels like responsibility. But turbulence does not come only from noise outside. It comes from conflict within, wanting and resisting at the same time, carrying obligations without acceptance, holding multiple selves without integration. Each inner contradiction is like another tap against the bowl. Over time, the water never settles. And when the water never settles, you begin to believe that reflection itself is impossible. This is why important things seem to slip away from you. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, repeatedly. You did not forget because you did not care. You forgot because the conditions for remembering were never present. The master never told the disciple to practice recalling his reflection. He did not assign techniques. He did not speak of discipline. He only taught him to recognize disturbance and to respect stillness. Because in the old way, stillness is not absence. It is the condition that allows things to remain. And until this is understood, every attempt to remember will feel like chasing water with your hands. The bowl does not need improvement. It needs quiet. What the parable points to is not poetic. It is precise. In the classical Daoist view, the mind is not an object you command. It is a state you inhabit. Memory, attention, and clarity arise naturally when this state is aligned. They disappear when it is disturbed. This leads to a principle that many adults sense but rarely articulate. You forget important things when your inner field is turbulent, not when you are unintelligent, not when you lack systems, not when you fail to try hard enough. Turbulence is the true cause. Inner turbulence is not chaos. Chaos is obvious. Turbulence is subtle. It exists when too many currents move at once, each justified, each unfinished. You can be calm on the surface and turbulent underneath. You can appear organized and still be inwardly unstable. This is why forgetting often increases during periods when life looks fine. You are functioning, meeting expectations, staying afloat, but nothing inside has been allowed to settle. In Daoist language, this is called losing the center. When the center is lost, the mind no longer rests in one place. It drifts between past and future, obligation and desire, regret and anticipation. Memory, which requires presence, cannot anchor itself. Most people misunderstand memory as storage. They imagine the mind as a room filled with drawers. Forgetting, then, must mean the drawers are mislabeled or overfilled. But this metaphor is flawed. The mind is more like open ground. What remains on it depends on whether the ground is steady. When the ground shakes, nothing stays. Here is the confrontation most people resist. Effort increases turbulence. When you strain to remember, you add motion to a field already in motion. You tap the bowl again and expect clarity. This is why reminders multiply while presence declines. Why planning intensifies while follow-through weakens. Why adults who try harder often feel more scattered, not less. The Inner Turbulence Principle states, what is important does not require force to be remembered. It requires a place to land. When the inner field is stable, remembrance happens without intention. You remember what matters because it aligns with who you are in that moment. When the field is unstable, even sacred things slip through. This is not a moral failure, it is a structural one. Confucian self-cultivation speaks of ordering the inner life before ordering the outer world. But modern adults reverse this. They arrange calendars, obligations, and appearances while leaving the inner ground fragmented. They live in reaction. Reaction is constant motion. Motion without rhythm creates fatigue. Fatigue creates forgetting. This is the chain that few people trace. You are not failing to remember because you lack care. You are forgetting because too much of you is elsewhere. Part of you is in what must be done next. Part of you is in what was not done before. Part of you is guarding against future regret. Part of you is maintaining an image. Each part pulls in a different direction. This division creates turbulence, and turbulence dissolves continuity. In internal cultivation, continuity is everything. It is what allows identity to remain coherent across time. Without it, life becomes a series of disconnected moments, each demanding attention, none retaining meaning. Forgetting, then, is not an isolated problem. It is a signal. It signals that your life has lost its rhythm. Not speed, rhythm. Rhythm allows movement without disturbance. It is why a river can flow powerfully and still reflect the sky. Turbulence, by contrast, is motion without harmony. The mistake most people make is trying to remember more. The work is to disturb less, but this immediately raises resistance. Because if turbulence is the problem, then your forgetting is not an enemy. It is a message, and messages require listening, not suppression. Before alignment can be restored, the modern condition that generates this turbulence must be named clearly, without blame and without illusion. That is where we must turn next. The turbulence you experienced did not arise in isolation. It was cultivated, slowly, reasonably, and with good intentions. This is the condition of adulthood in its middle years. You are not overwhelmed because you cannot handle life. You are overwhelmed because you are handling too many versions of it at once. In earlier seasons, life moved in clearer lines. You studied, you trained, you struggled, you aimed. Attention had direction because identity had direction. But as years accumulate, roles multiply. You become a professional, a caretaker, a partner, a problem solver, a stabilizer. Each role asks for a different posture of mind. Each claims urgency. None waits patiently. So attention fractures, not dramatically, but continuously. You wake already behind. You move through days, responding rather than choosing. You end evenings exhausted without remembering what truly mattered within them. This is not a distraction in the childish sense. It is a responsibility without containment. In classical cultivation, responsibility is meant to be carried from the center. When it is not, it pulls the person apart. Fragmentation occurs when action outruns integration. You do many things, but you are not fully present in any of them. Not because you do not care, but because caring has been spread thin. This is why forgetting strikes hardest at what is meaningful, not what is urgent. You remember deadlines. You remember obligations. You remember what others expect, but you forget the intentions that came from your own depth. You forget the quiet reasons that once guided you, not because they vanished, but because they were never given space to return. The body remembers stress, the calendar remembers tasks, but the inner life is left unattended, and what is unattended does not remain. There is a quiet grief that accompanies this, though few name it. It is the grief of living efficiently while feeling absent from one's own life, of sensing that days pass correctly but not coherently, of realizing that you are reliable, yet inwardly scattered. This grief often turns inward as self-criticism. I should be more focused. I should be better at managing my time. I should be more disciplined by now. But these judgments misunderstand the nature of the problem. You cannot discipline fragmentation into wholeness. Fragmentation is not a lack of effort. It is a lack of unity. In Daoist terms, unity arises when action follows alignment rather than demand, when movement flows from stillness instead of urgency. But modern life rewards the opposite. It rewards responsiveness over reflection, speed over rhythm, availability over depth. And so adults learn to live in a state of permanent readiness, always slightly leaning forward, always preparing for what comes next. This posture creates continuous inner motion. Even at rest, the mind does not settle. It replays conversations, anticipates problems, and reviews unfinished loops. This is turbulence masquerading as responsibility. Over time, the cost appears. You forget why you chose a path. You forget what nourishes you. You forget promises made quietly to yourself, not all at once, slowly, one layer at a time, until forgetting feels normal and remembering feels like work. This is the danger point. Because when forgetting becomes habitual, identity begins to thin. You still function, but you no longer feel anchored. The ancients warned against this state, not with alarm, but with gravity. A person without an inner center can be moved by anything. This is why your mind feels full, yet unreliable. Why effort increases, while clarity declines. It is not that your life is too complex. It is that your attention has been divided without being recollected. Before alignment can be restored, another obstacle must be faced, one that appears virtuous, but deepens the turbulence. It is your relationship with discipline itself. When forgetting persists, most adults do not question their approach. They question themselves. They assume a personal flaw must exist, a lack of will, a lack of seriousness, a failure to mature properly. So they reach for discipline, not the quiet discipline of cultivation, but the loud discipline of self-correction. They tighten schedules, they add rules, they demand consistency through force. At first, this feels responsible, even virtuous. After all, adulthood teaches that effort solves problems. But here is the contradiction few notice. The more you force discipline onto a turbulent inner life, the more turbulent it becomes. This is resistance disguised as virtue. In classical Confucian self-cultivation, discipline is never imposed violently. It emerges from clarity of role and alignment of conduct. When identity is clear, behavior follows naturally. Modern adults reverse this order. They attempt to manufacture identity through behavior. I will become focused by acting focused. I will become reliable by forcing reliability. I will become aligned by enforcing routines. But without an inner center, these actions are not rooted. They float. You may comply for a while. You may remember more for a short period. You may feel briefly in control. Then something slips. A routine breaks. A promise is missed. A familiar forgetting returns. And when it does, the inner voice becomes harsher. What is wrong with me? Why can't I keep this up? Others manage. Why can't I? This voice is not disciplined. It is fragmentation speaking to itself. Resistance appears in subtle forms. You resist stillness because it feels unproductive. You resist slowing down because you equate it with falling behind. You resist listening inwardly because you fear what you might hear. You resist recognizing fatigue, grief, or discomfort because acknowledging them would require change. So instead, you push forward. This creates a cycle. Turbulence leads to forgetting. Forgetting leads to self-blame. Self-blame leads to forced discipline. Forced discipline increases turbulence. The cycle tightens quietly, often unnoticed, until it has already eroded inner clarity. The tragedy is that the adult often believes this struggle is necessary, that self-pressure is the price of competence. Yet effort without alignment is not competence. It is repetition without presence. You may accomplish externally, but internally you fragment further. But the ancients taught a different way. False discipline demands that you remember despite your inner state. True cultivation asks why the state cannot hold memory. False discipline is aggressive. True discipline is receptive. False discipline forces. True discipline observes. When you see this clearly, something uncomfortable emerges. You realize that forgetting has been signaling misalignment for a long time, and that you have been silencing the signal instead of addressing its cause. You begin to notice how often you measure yourself against external standards rather than listening to internal rhythm. You begin to understand that the struggle is not proof of failure, it is a message. This realization often brings resistance because it suggests that the solution is not more effort, but less disturbance, and less disturbance requires restraint, patience, and a willingness to let go of the identity built on constant striving. Before anything can be retained, something must be released. This is the threshold most adults avoid. Yet beyond it lies a deeper law, one that governs not only memory, but stability itself. There is a law beneath effort that governs all retention. It is older than discipline, older than memory, older than intention. Stillness precedes retention. In Daoist cultivation, nothing is held by force. What remains does so because the conditions are right for remaining. This applies to breath, to posture, to relationships, and to memory. When stillness is present, things stay. When stillness is absent, nothing can be kept. This does not mean inactivity. It means the absence of inner resistance. A mountain is still, yet it endures weather, seasons, and time. A river is in motion, yet it follows its course without turbulence because its movement is aligned. Stillness is not stopping. It is not a withdrawal. It is not passivity. It is a settled movement. When the inner life is settled, remembrance requires no effort. You remember what matters because it fits within you. It resonates. It belongs. This is why chasing memory fails. When you chase, you introduce urgency. Urgency introduces tension. Tension disturbs the inner field, so what you seek moves farther away. Wu Wei is often misunderstood as doing nothing. In truth, it means doing nothing against the nature of things. When applied to memory, it means not acting against the mind's need for stillness. Important things return when you stop reaching for them. You may have noticed this. The name you struggle to recall appears when you are no longer trying. The insight you forced emerges when you step away. The clarity you demanded arrives during quiet moments. This is not a coincidence. It is the law. Stillness allows alignment. Alignment allows continuity. Continuity allows remembrance. The modern adult resists this because stillness feels like risk. It feels like surrendering control. And control has become a survival strategy. But control is heavy. It creates constant inner gripping. Gripping scatters the mind. In internal arts, practitioners are taught that excessive holding leads to loss of sensitivity. The tighter the grip, the less one feels. The less one feels, the more one forgets. Memory fades not because the mind is weak, but because it is clenched. Stillness releases the clench. This stillness is cultivated quietly over time. It is nurtured in long walks without distraction, in pauses between tasks, in attention to the breath and the posture of the body. It grows when the mind is allowed to rest on itself, without interruption from urgency or judgment. It is often mistaken for idleness because its progress is invisible. Yet in this invisibility lies its power. The smallest return of calm, repeated consistently, begins to reshape the inner field. Stillness also reveals what does not belong. Certain commitments dissolve, certain concerns lose weight, certain self-images weaken. This is why many avoid it. Stillness does not only restore memory, it refines identity. It shows you what remains when movement ceases, and what remains is what can be carried forward without effort. But stillness cannot be achieved by technique alone. It must be supported by the body, the breath, and the way one inhabits oneself. Only when the inner field is settled and the body aligned can turbulence truly diminish and the mind retain what matters. Memory and identity are not held in the mind alone. They are housed in the body, carried in posture, anchored in the rhythm of breath. The ancients understood this. They observed that a tense body scatters attention, just as a restless river scatters reflection. Breath that is shallow and hurried stirs turbulence within. Movement without awareness ripples through the mind like wind across water. Yet modern adults have largely forgotten this truth. We think remembering is only a matter of focus, effort, or mental exercise. We believe the body is merely a vehicle for thought, and that the mind exists independently of the frame it inhabits. This misunderstanding breeds forgetting. A body held in tension tightens the mind. Muscles clenched, shoulders lifted, jaw pressed, all become conduits of inner unrest. The mind cannot rest while the body resists itself. Memory, which requires stillness, has no surface upon which to settle. Breath carries a subtle power. When deep, even, and mindful, it quiets internal storms. When shallow or anxious, it amplifies them. In Daoist practice, the breath is the thread that ties body and mind together, a living bridge that allows reflection and retention. Without attending to it, forgetting becomes inevitable. Even a simple posture matters. How you sit, stand, and move through space determines whether your inner field can remain stable. Slouched, hurried, or ungrounded, attention fractures. Aligned, steady, attentive, even in motion, clarity emerges naturally. Adults often overlook this because life seems urgent. Meetings, obligations, social roles, tasks, all demand presence in the outer world. Yet the inner world, where memory and identity dwell, receives little cultivation. Ignoring this is why the same person can remember a schedule perfectly, but forget what nourishes them or what they promise themselves in quiet moments. The body cannot be separated from cultivation. When you slow the breath, release tension, and inhabit your posture fully, turbulence diminishes. Memory does not require effort. It flows from the stability of being. This does not mean you must sit silently for hours. Stillness in the body can be practiced in motion, walking, stretching, carrying out daily tasks with attention, allowing breath to guide presence. Even brief moments of alignment accumulate over time, each one softening turbulence. Pay attention to the subtle signals the body offers. A tight chest may indicate holding that you do not even name. A restless leg may signal unacknowledged thought. A stiff back may reveal resistance to inner stillness. A shallow voice may betray unexpressed feeling. Listening to these messages gently, without judgment, is part of the cultivation itself. In this way, the forgotten mind begins to remember. It is not a memory of facts alone, but a memory of self, of values, of purpose. You begin to recollect not only what you have misplaced, but also who you are beneath the pressures, obligations, and noise of daily life. The body, the breath, and attention are not separate tools. They are the foundation. Without them, no amount of mental effort can restore what is lost. And finally, when the body is relaxed, the breath is even and attention is grounded, the mind naturally aligns. Forgetting loses its grip, and the essential begins to return. The next step, after understanding the body and breath, is to see how this cultivation shapes identity itself, not through invention, but through refinement. Forgetting is not only a failure of memory, it is a mirror of identity. What slips away quietly reflects not what you cannot hold, but what has no place in the center of your being. When the inner field is turbulent, the self itself begins to fragment. You remember what is urgent, what is demanded, what is expected, yet lose touch with what is essential. Identity, in the classical understanding, is not constructed by effort. It is discovered through refinement, not by adding new habits or achievements, but by removing the layers that conceal your essence, the unnecessary, the reactive, the imposed. All of it must be gently shed. This process is often mistaken for loss, yet loss is not the teacher here. Clarity is. You forget, and in that forgetting, you are shown what truly matters, what remains when the noise falls away. Many adults resist this refinement because it feels like surrender. To refine identity is to confront what no longer serves you. It is to let go of self-images tied to approval, efficiency, or control. It is to face the parts of yourself that have been ignored while tending to everything else. And yet, this is where remembrance begins. When the inner turbulence calms, what surfaces is the real self, not the self you perform, not the self you imagine, but the self that aligns with the rhythms of being. This self does not need to be forced, corrected, or invented. It is already present, waiting beneath the agitation. Refinement requires patience. It requires quiet observation of thought, action, and feeling. It requires the courage to witness the gaps between who you have been and who you are. And it requires the willingness to allow these gaps to be filled, not with effort, but with alignment. This is the paradox of cultivation. You gain clarity not by accumulation, but by subtraction. By letting go of turbulence, the mind becomes a vessel that can hold what is important. By letting go of false roles and imposed identities, the self becomes coherent. By letting go of control, remembrance flows naturally. The process is subtle, often invisible, and easily misunderstood. You may not notice progress day to day. Moments of forgetting may still occur, yet the rhythm of your inner life begins to shift. You begin to inhabit yourself more fully. You remember intentions, values, and truths without strain. This is not transformation by action alone. It is a transformation by alignment. It is a reclaiming of the inner ground where memory, purpose, and identity can settle. When you refine in this way, forgetting no longer carries the weight of shame. It becomes a guidepost pointing you toward misalignment and the areas in need of care. And slowly, quietly, the mind and the self become coherent once more. You are not reinventing yourself. You are returning to the essence that has always been present, returning to a self capable of holding what matters. The work of identity refinement is not urgent. It does not demand speed, force, or comparison. It asks only for honesty, attention, and the willingness to inhabit your own life with presence. This is the stage of remembering and being aligned, where forgetting ceases to be a signal of failure and becomes a teacher of refinement, where the self, finally centered, can carry the weight of life without losing its clarity. Time is not an enemy. It does not hurry you, nor does it punish. Yet it is honest in its measures. The years accumulate quietly, and with them, the consequences of turbulence. What was left unattended drifts further from your grasp. Moments pass. Promises fade. Intentions dissolve. This is not judgment. It is fact. Regret often arrives in whispers rather than shouts. You notice it in the slight sinking when recalling what you have forgotten. You feel it in the quiet weight of opportunities not fully taken or lessons not fully learned. And yet regret is not here to condemn you. It exists to guide attention, to mark what has been overlooked so that alignment may begin. The path forward is not one of frantic recovery. It is not measured by what you can hold, force, or control. It is measured by your willingness to inhabit stillness, to refine identity, and to restore rhythm to your inner life. The quiet path asks you to observe yourself without urgency, to notice tension in the body, to follow the breath, to release the roles, the habits, the expectations that do not align with the self at your center. You will forget again. This is inevitable. But the quality of forgetting changes. It no longer carries shame. It no longer fragments the self. It becomes a messenger, pointing to turbulence, signaling what needs attention, teaching the rhythm of presence. Alignment is gradual. Consistency emerges from rhythm, not effort. Strength is born from stillness within action, not from pushing against yourself. The essence of what matters returns not because you chase it, but because you provide space for it to remain. You will still encounter days when memory fails, when focus wanes, when the mind feels scattered. These are not failures. They are invitations to return again and again to the still center that is always present. Even in forgetfulness, the self remains intact, waiting, observing, ready to receive what is essential. This is the final lesson. You do not need to reinvent yourself. You need only to return. Return to a life shaped by quiet attention, refined identity, and settled presence. The future is not secured by memory alone. It is secured by the coherence of the self that remembers, chooses, and inhabits each moment fully. Time will continue. Life will continue. And in that continuity, you will carry what is truly essential. Walk forward not with urgency, not with fear, but with quiet resolve. Let turbulence teach, let stillness guide, and let yourself, refined, aligned, and present, hold what matters. Every breath, every step, every pause is a chance to return. And in this return, forgetting itself becomes a guide, not a loss.